He's cute. He's out this late, you know. You see why they took the microphone from me. Anyway, A Body of Divinity by Archbishop James Ussher. Stephen? You read this?
Yeah, parts of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Recommended, and why?
Yeah, very good.
Why? Why is it strategic? Okay, obviously a Renahan needs to answer this. Why is this...
Ussher...
You want to hold it? Maybe it'll...
Ussher is also the author of the Irish Articles. Mm-hmm. The Irish Articles stand as one of the formative documents for the Westminster Confession, and the Westminster Confession stands as a formative document for both the Savoy and our own Confession of Faith. Ergo, the theology that you're going to get in here is not only the background and the context for our own confession, but it's a fairly standard representative approach amongst the Reformed Orthodox.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you read Ussher, and he quotes both James Dolezal and Stephen Lindblad. So this is a good one.
Remember what I said about anachronisms? That's a big one.
Okay, the way we do this is I take the questions that I determine are worth reading. Some of them aren't. You want to hear some that aren't worth reading?
Please exercise your free knowledge.
Here it goes.
Free will. And don't read some of them.
I won't read all of them.
Nil to read them.
Like this one. Here's one. Dr. Dolezal. Really? That's what it says, right?
Is that from today, though?
It was a dumb one from last year. What is your choice of razor for your head? But it applies to you. Are you a Gillette type of guy, Dollar Shave Club guy? What's your preference?
I just use a hair trimmers, and put it with no guard.
Boring.
I do the same thing on my face. I don't shave with a straight razor. Did you need to know that too?
No. Okay, let's try to transition. This guy's just full of laughs. Let's try to transition. Can you get serious for us? We're paying you to be serious. Yeah.
Those were good tacos.
Those were good tacos, weren't they? Wow. Okay, here we go. Let's do this. Speaker looks like he's hot. That doesn't sound right. Feels hot to me also. You were sweating up here, so.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't feel any of it.
I guess this means Edwards is not your homeboy.
No. I'll say this. My estimate of Jonathan Edwards has transitioned from something which is entirely negative as a result of a little bit of reading in seminary to having taken a doctoral seminar from George Marsden, which gave me a better appreciation for Edwards in his context. Now, theologically, Edwards is not my homeboy, especially given that for all that he does say in appreciating Reformed theology prior to him, he's nevertheless highly influenced by a number of philosophical shifts that were taking place or had taken place just prior to his own life and work. And understanding that context and understanding that all of the shifts that were taking place in philosophy and theology while Edwards was fulfilling his work, his labors, understanding that context gave me an appreciation for Edwards as being a man of his own time. And I think it helps me to, and it should help us to recognize how we are men and ministers and theologians of our own time who cannot help but at times be caught up in the theological and philosophical winds and whims of the age.
This is then connected to that. Are you claiming God... That'll help. Thank you. Are you claiming God could have created a world different from that which he in fact created?
Yes.
Now, Jonathan Edwards would say...
No.
Why and what philosophical influences of his day were clouding his ability to basically pass the tradition on, because he left the tradition, right?
Yeah. That's a pretty big question as it relates to Edwards. And even in Edwards' studies, of which I've only done cursory reading, so I can't speak as an authority on Edwards, but obviously Locke, Melbranch, and there's one other big one that's typically associated with or as the background for Edwards' philosophical thinking. Bacon, it might be.
Francis Bacon.
Yeah, Francis Bacon. But if you want to know something of the way in which Edwards stacks necessity in relation to the decree and the creation of the world, in distinction from, for example, Turretin, Richard Muller has an article on necessity and freedom and contingency in Edwards and Turretin. He also has another article, and that article is a response to Paul Helm, who seeks to sort of defend Edwards. And Helm's article was itself a response to something that Muller had written. And if you want those references, I have them, and you can sort through that material yourself. But I think the basic picture is when Edwards asks the question, and for what reason essentially did God create the world? He speaks as if the glory of God is dependent upon the world and the creation of the world. And once you make that move, concomitant with his notion of being and God as that which has most being, so the being of God and the being of humanity are not just univocally related, but they're a piece of being generically considered. Then you've got issues of panentheism. Not just, the issue of necessitarianism and determinism isn't the biggest fish that Edwards has to fry. There's really a latent panentheism in his theology that I think gets muted by certain folks in the Reformed world who love his approach to piety.
There's another question. Would you please explain the difference between the necessity of the consequent and the necessity of the consequence? Could they be distinguished as God had to decree what comes to pass, necessity of the consequent, and God decreed in such a way that all things come to pass necessarily, necessity of the consequence? You can read it right there if you like.
Yeah,
Consequent, consequence.
Right. The necessity of the consequent is an absolute necessity inhering in the thing. So It can be no other way. Eventually, sure. Okay, keep going. The necessity of the consequence would be that something is necessary based upon some prior cause. In other words, the cause being the decree, the execution of that decree. So the execution of the decree, for example, in the creation of the world, is necessary on the terms of the decree. So it's not that God's own existence and essence necessitates a world, but God's decree necessitates a world. If a world is absolutely necessary, there's something in God that must be completed by, or something in God lacking that needs to be completed or supplemented by His creation of the world. And that's a necessity of the consequent. Necessity of the consequence is God has no need for the world, and yet out of His good pleasure determines to create the world, permit the fall, redeem sinners through Christ, etc.,
So the latter is what I think you were quoting Willebius and maybe Turretin?
Yeah.
And you're saying that Edwards took the former view.
Yeah.
And that's where the problems start to...
Right.
Now, somebody backed up, but it's connected to this. Define panentheism? Pantheism? Panentheism. He said panentheism, right? Panentheism.
So, theism maintains a distinction, a basic distinction between God and the created order. Pantheism wholly identifies God and the created order. They're just one thing. Panentheism encloses God within the world order without collapsing God into the world order. So it's not quite pantheism wholesale, but it removes ultimately the creator-creature distinction and makes God wholly operative within the world order without any existence apart from the world order.
Okay, now how does Edwards' view lead toward
Being.
his doctrine of being, his ontology? How does that go? Oh, because God is a higher...
God, so if being is like a pie,
Okay, God has more...
God has 51% of it and the world has 49% of it, but it's all being.
Now, what's the more traditional language? Perfect being theology? Is that what they call it?
Not necessarily. Perfect being theology is typically associated in some respects with Anselm, and it's been resuscitated in large part by analytic theologians or analytic philosophers. If you're familiar with Alvin Plantinga, he's taken the perfect being route, and also Molinism. It's different than saying God is perfect, as the tradition wants to say.
This is somebody trying to nudge you along and make you use illustrations more. The Force is panentheism. Force as in Star Wars. That's an example. True or false?
No, that would be pantheism. That'd be a form. The Force in Star Wars would be pantheism, straight pantheism. God is in.
Wait a minute. Do you realize who this Jim is that typed that?
Oh, is that Jim? Well,
no, it's Dr. Renahan. He wasn't there for that lecture, obviously. Ask your wife.
I'm not a Star Wars nerd. I like them, but unlike some people.
Okay, we have another one here. I plan on listening to the live stream tomorrow. Oh, good. Jeffrey Waddington is going to listen to your... Tomorrow, by the way, we're going to live stream. You can let people know we're going to live stream his critique of the book edited by Bruce Ware on the Doctrine of the Trinity. He's going to do that tomorrow. What time's that one? I forgot.
I have
tomorrow.
no idea.
He's going to do it tomorrow after 11 or something like that. We'll put it up in various places, but it's the Trinity TRBC live stream link. Let everybody know. I think that'll be a good... I've read it. It's very good. What's that? 11:10, okay.
And if you thought these first two lectures were long...
Yeah,
Sorry.
but just read the ones I told you to read.
Yeah.
After a while,
okay.
he got tired of me suggesting.
No, I didn't get tired of you suggesting. I just got tired.
Oh, okay. This is for your dad. Did Jonathan Edwards merely read the manuscript, Two Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God? Since you were there, yeah. Don forgot that one.
There's no text. He's just making that up.
I wouldn't make anything like that up. There is another one here. What is Molinism, and why can't there be Calvinistic Molinists? There are people that call themselves that in our day.
Yeah. Molinism is the theology of Molina. Molina was a Jesuit in the 16th century who argued that between God's necessary knowledge, again, his knowledge of himself and his knowledge of all things possible, and between that on the one hand and his free knowledge, his knowledge of that which he has chosen to actualize, there was between that what he called middle knowledge. And a middle knowledge was a knowledge of, based upon his omniscience, in which he accounted for all of what Molina called counterfactuals, so all of the supposed conditions under which human free agents would make certain choices. And out of that notion of middle knowledge, Molina predicated that God's free knowledge was based in some measure upon, and hence his foreknowledge is predicated, his determinations are predicated upon and determined by his middle knowledge, his knowledge of that which free creatures or men would choose to do. And if you know anything about the 16th and 17th centuries and about Reformed theology in that era, you'll know that while no Roman Catholic was the best bud or best buds with the Reformed, or Protestants in general, you know that they generally had some patience with the Dominicans, but they had no patience whatsoever for the Jesuits, including Molina. And much of their argumentation regarding the knowledge of God and the will of God and the decree of God establishes itself against the argumentation of Molina. So the whole idea that you could have the wedding of Calvinism and Molinism is historically just a non-starter. Theologically, as I tried at least to express in the lecture, if you understand God's natural or necessary knowledge and his free knowledge, I don't know that there's really a place for middle knowledge. And so when Bruce Ware and Terence Thiessen want to try to argue, for example, for Calvinist middle knowledge, to me it just does. I cannot follow the argument, and I cannot make heads or tails of what it is that they're really trying to maintain, other than, for example, with Thiessen, that prayer really does matter. It seems to be his big driving concern.
Who is Terence Thiessen?
I don't know who he is, but I've read a little bit of his stuff on this. Not super familiar with it, but it just doesn't track.
Okay, this will switch gears just a little. Why does Barth establish the idea of the God-man being the decree or election of God like he does? Who is it a reaction? Who's he reacting to or responding to? Are you upset?
No, I'm just trying to. It's a big subject
Got
because
mad.
no. Everything that Barth does plays or comes out of his conception of a number of issues. One is his utter denial of natural revelation, his and thus a conflation of revelation with Christ. It also at work is what you might call an actualist ontology, in that, and that coupled with a really radical conception of divine freedom, in which God is sort of constantly actualizing himself into the world in moments of revelation. So it's not as if God is God, and out of his will and good pleasure, he decrees all things and thus brings all things to pass according to that plan and purpose. But God is sort of what Barth wants to call being an act. And so he's constantly having these moments in which he's revealing himself, such that Barth can even say that God could reveal himself, if he so willed or so chose, in a dead dog. And so you've got a lot of really interesting concepts at work in his theology, but what he always wants to come back to is what he will say is the primacy of Jesus Christ as revelation, the primacy of the Word, or by which he means Jesus Christ, in election.
Was he reacting to something or someone's?
He was reacting in part to his own theological teachers. Barth was raised, theologically speaking, on theological liberalism. Adolf von Harnack was his professor, and he was taught theological liberalism in full. And what caused him to reevaluate the promise of that theology was the fact that all of his beloved professors, including von Harnack, basically stood lockstep with fascism and eventually the Nazis. And Barth could not live with a theology that he thought could sanction such horror. And he believed that, for example, Nazism was the outworking of natural theology. Hence his distaste for any natural revelation, any form of natural theology.